Hi folks, it's Ryan here with Magus Instrumentalis. Today we're going to be starting a new series where we look at each of our modules and examine different ways of using them that might not be immediately apparent when you first see them. So today we're looking at Catoptromancer, otherwise known as Vert, and we're going to be using it as a half-wave rectifier. This is a very simple thing, but it can be extremely useful in things like sound design or even just utilities in your patching. So really quick rundown on what Vert is. It's something that takes your input signal and inverts it, obviously, but instead of making the signal negative, so for example, if you send 10 volts into an inverter, you get negative 10 volts, right? Makes sense. With Vert, when you send 10 volts in, you get 0 volts. If you send 9 volts in, you get 1 volt, etc., etc. You can also set it to flip between -5 and 5 volts, but we're not doing that today. We're just looking at using the setting the module to 0 to 10 volts. So what is rectification? It's probably a little bit easier if I show you, so let's do that really quickly. So first let's look at what we've got here. This is just, I'm just controlling the output of a VCO here. And so when I turn this on, we're going to see in here the sine wave. The sine wave is not doing anything special. It's just there to show you what the original waveform is. Now let's look what happens when we send this through Vert. And I want you to keep in mind here that the oscillators, at least the built-in VCV ones, are bipolar, meaning that they travel between 0 and 5, or in this case, I believe it's 0 and 10 volts. Or sorry, between -5 and 5, or -10 and 10. So let's pull this up. Sorry, and I misspoke. It's between -5 and 5, not -10 and 10. So there you go. There's your sine wave. Now look what happens when we send it through Vert. So as you can see, the bottom half of the waveform is now gone. So what we have is, on the first half of the duty cycle, we have what is essentially what is a sine wave, or half of a sine wave, I should say, and the other half we have what is essentially a square wave. So we've clipped like half of that, half the waveform. So what's happening here is that we've set our input to be 0 to 10 volts. Anything below that is going to be clipped. So instead of worrying about the inversion, we've already flipped it back around, so we don't have to think about the inversion anymore. If you invert something twice, we have essentially the same signal, but it's being clipped because anything below 0 is being ignored by Vert. Otherwise, it wouldn't function. So this is just a really easy, simple way to shape your sound a bit. Now, with sine waves, you're just getting a little bit of wave shaping, and you can do things like combine the two to produce new waveforms. You could also invert the phase and then combine them, and you would get potentially different sounds. And this is also true with other waveforms. You could also construct new waveforms by, for example, combining an inverted waveform, let's say, of a sine wave with the non-inverted waveform of a triangle waveform or something like that. So one half of the waveform is a sine, one half is a triangle, so you don't have to just have it be a square wave on the other end. And there's all sorts of other combinations you can do by adding and subtracting different waveforms together. So let's also look at another use. This is just red noise that I'm sending out. You can hear what that sounds like. And if we listen to the half-wave rectified version, then we get kind of interesting distorted noise, which is nice. So when you combine the two, you get really interesting sounds. For me, this would be a nice tool when doing some sound design for a film or something like that. It's an interesting kind of static. If you have, let's say, a random signal, and we've set that to be bipolar here, over on, you'll notice on the random module, we have a bipolar random signal. And let's actually change the time here so that we can get a more detailed view of what's going on here. So you can see, there we go. We've got random signal. Let's draw that a little faster. Random signal that's floating around 0. Now, if we look at what's coming out of Vert, we now have a random signal that roughly 50% of the time is going to be at 0. So it's not going to be changing what's there at all. There's lots of ways you could use that. For example, you could send a sequence or combine it with a sequence, for example, to have random variations on a sequence. But to have it be closer to the original sequence than having it just be random, let's say. So you would get more of a sense of that original sequence because a good portion of the time it would be at 0. So that's just one sort of utility use I found for it. So rectification is really a useful utility. It's not something you're always going to use, but when you want to use it, it's really nice to have. So this is just another way to use your Vert module to create more interesting patches and to get more functionality out of what is a fairly simple module.